Well, let's try again. So this study shows, I'll show you the study later, but this study shows, it's a 2019 study by a professor of psychology from the University of Essex, that despite the fact that in the Scandinavian countries they have been working hard for many years to provide gender equality and opportunities, and yet fewer than 25% of the science college graduates are women in the Scandinavian countries, whereas in India it's 35 to 40% of those enrolled in science programs are women. You have Algeria, United Arab Emirates and Qatar amongst the least gender equal places in the world, and yet 35 to 40% of their STEM graduates are women, comparable to India. And in some countries, I saw some statistics. I need to check them out again, and I'll give you a copy of this report afterwards. It's called The Gender Gap in Technology in Scandinavia. It's a 2019 report, and they're trying to work out why a generation later, after giving them all the equality and opportunities, their percentage of women that are engineers and scientists and doctors are significantly less in Finland than they are in the United States, and they're significantly higher in places like Morocco and Algeria and Qatar, which are not very gender equal, shall we say. So you could argue why that is, but that's a reality. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that because I threw out a comment a day or two ago, and I always like to back up what I say, that it's not just hot air. Okay, let's get back to what we were doing yesterday, and here we want to continue we left off pretty much with a question, if you remember, on the Biur HaGra, right? Which I want to actually show to you inside now, which is really important. So, just to recap, we saw the Shulchan Aruch, the Vilna Gaon was on page 4, I think it was. We didn't, because I gave you a separate sheet for it, sorry. I gave you a separate sheet for it, where the Vilna Gaon explained why Noshim Mevarchos Birchas HaTorah, because he has a problem. The Vilna Gaon actually has a problem. What's the problem? Let's get into this. Why? What is the Vilna Gaon's problem? Why Noshim Mevarchos Birchas HaTorah? Because it's Melamdo Tiflus. So to make a bracha, it is true that if women learn Torah, they do get schar. It is Talmud Torah, but it's Melamdo Tiflus. So clearly, it's not a good idea. So what's the bracha? Where does the bracha come from? So the Vilna Gaon answered, who remembers?
I mean, one possibility.
The Vilna Gaon gave us one. What did the Vilna Gaon say?
He was on page 3, just for...
No, I gave it to you as a separate sheet. The Vilna Gaon said because it was a mitzvah saseh, like making a bracha on a mitzvah saseh shazman groma. Okay?
Yes, right.
Now that is a problem, by the way. There's a technical problem with that. What's the problem with that? You might not be familiar. I mentioned it a little bit. The Vilna Gaon seems to be saying it as pshat in the Shulchan Aruch, but that's very difficult to understand that should be pshat in the Shulchan Aruch, because the Shulchan Aruch paskins women do not make a bracha on mitzvah saseh shazman groma.
Mm-hmm.
And we finished off yesterday by asking, why does he feel forced, if that's the right word, to answer that the reason why women make a bracha on Birchas HaTorah is because it's mitzvah saseh shazman groma, and not answer the question from the fact that it's tiflus and differentiate, like you, Gabi, I think said, because the difference between learning and teaching. He doesn't do that.
Right.
You're looking confused.
Yeah, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the problem with getting the points to the sources,
Okay.
So
I would also suggest, by the way, if I may, that on some days, certainly, you do get there is quite a lot of information you're given. Mm-hmm. If you don't do chazara, I do chazara. I prepare, believe it or not, and And therefore I do Chazorah, and I remind myself, and I have a pretty good memory, and I have learned some of this stuff before, and I need to do Chazorah. If you think you're going to remember and retain and be able to regurgitate, that's why Vashinantam, Levant Vashinantam means to repeat. The only way is to repeat. You repeat something, you learn again and again. Just hearing it from, a shiur one morning and then the next day, of course not. You're not Einstein. I mean, you're very bright and everything, but you're not Einstein. You're not going to remember unless if these topics are important to you. L'chura, you would somehow in your Seder HaLimud find, whether it's 15 minutes a day. I would actually suggest that, they're up there on YouTube if you want to quickly look at them for reference. You've got the sources. I'm trying to take topics which are important, with important makoros. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to do Chazorah, you will forget quite quickly. No shaila. So
just notice.
It's not a criticism, it's an observation. It's reality. It's just reality. Yeah. So it would make sense, maybe. I don't know how your schedule works, but it would. I mean, when we had in Shiva, when you have shiur, we used to have a schedule. I'm sure you had a shiur for Chazorah. Chazorah says shiur. Okay, so it doesn't. You decide how long or whatever, and then maybe take some notes. I would have without, again, having a notebook or something like that would help. Oh, you've got a notebook. I do see you writing down. So it's important to have I have for myself files of where you take notes. You organize it, and then much more likely to remember it. Okay, so maybe it's not a realistic expectation. Do you remember the Gaon? But I don't want to do every morning, go over everything. Also, so the Vilna Gaon said the Shulchan Aruch paskins noshim mevarchos b'rchas haTorah, right? And the Vilna Gaon asks, but it's Malam Tiflus. So where does the bracha come in? Answers the Vilna Gaon, because it's a mitzvah saseh shazman groma. And it's like a mitzvah saseh shazman groma, something they are potur from, but if they elect, if a woman chooses to do it, at least this is the opinion of the Ramah, and the problem is he's saying it in the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch paskins, right, Sephardi women do not, even if they were to shake lulav, they would not make a bracha. So, and that's one problem. And the other problem, which we haven't really dealt with, and the other problem is, why did he not take the easy way out, which would be to distinguish and say that, yes, the problem is Melamdo Tiflis is to teach her, but if she wishes to go and learn Torah, then of course she should say Berchas Torah. Why not? He doesn't, he was very smart, the Vilna Gaon, and he chose not to go down that route. That means he doesn't agree with it. The question is, why? So first of all, before we go any further, let's have a look. Page 3, the bottom, a little piece from Rav Shach on his Sefer Avi Ezri on Hilchos Talmud Torah. Should we learn that? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not long and it's not very difficult. Let's have a look. Hine mefurash kan masha omru ki'ilo melamdo tiflus shehu din rak al ha'av sheloi lelamed es bitoy Torah sheba'al peh. Says Rav Shach, it's very clear in the Rambam that the halacha is it's a din on the father not to teach his daughter Torah sheba'al peh. Aval ha'isha atzma hi mekayemes mitzvahs Talmud Torah umuteres hi lilmoid. It is absolutely in order for a woman who wishes to teach herself to learn Torah sheba'al peh. That is absolutely no problem whatsoever. Not only that, but it does fall under the category of mitzvahs Talmud Torah, because that's how the Rambam formulates it. And he says, you get schar. If a woman decides to learn Torah, she gets schar like an enim and suvav isa. And then he adds something really interesting. He says, she yodas ba'atzma sheloi medes lehislamed v'loi soitzi es divrei Torah ledivrei havai. He says something really interesting, which, if I'm honest, one could challenge or ask. He says as follows, and he comes at this from the psychological motivation. He says, the problem is a father teaching his daughter Torah. The Rambam says that, or the Torah really says that or Rov Noshim, the Rambam as well, most women will not, generally speaking, have the capacity to learn Torah and absorb it in a way that it ought to be absorbed. That's their statement. Again, very non-PC, but that's too bad. We don't apologize for that. Their brains are amazing and they're good at other things, but they will be Moitzi Torah and Divrei Havai, Rov Noshim. And therefore, to compel, see, this is the thing also sometimes people don't appreciate. when we are talking about, generally speaking, in Torah, when you talk about mitzvahs, usually the most common two modalities are either obligation or prohibition. This almost, it's not a gray area, but this in between area of if you want to kind of thing is not the norm. In other words, of course it exists, but our language, the way we frame our language and our relationship to Torah and mitzvahs is, generally speaking, either asay or lois asay. Those are our most common. So therefore, for the Torah to come along and say, see, Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, mitzvah, that's the key word. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the Rambam explains that because roiv noshim ein datom mechuvenes lislamed and nebi, therefore the Torah was not mitzaveh it. Therefore, a father actually should not teach his daughter. There is this thing that will be women, because if the Torah was to be mitzaveh that, the Torah would effectively being self-destructive. That's what the Torah would be doing. It's not a good idea. Now, because then he would be forcing a father to teach his daughter, and roiv hanoshim, it's not a good idea for them. Of course, there are women for whom it is absolutely fine. How are they going to... We don't deny them access to Torah. They're not denied access to Torah. Don't stop them. But their access is through choosing to learn Torah. I had a very interesting meeting with a woman from the Kehillah yesterday. Interesting woman, very smart, intelligent, and she is one that will fit into this category, in my not so humble opinion, that somebody who does delve into Torah and learns Torah, but totally gets it. We actually, because it was not long after I'd given this shiur, so I took the opportunity. We discussed it a little bit, and she totally gets it. And this is a smart woman with a serious academic career, but her choice now, knowing everything that the Rambam says, she nevertheless makes a choice to sit down and learn. She knows she's not mitzvah. She understands. She says, I'm not the norm. And we'll develop this a little bit further. But the likelihood, she's not coming at this from a militant, feminist, political agenda that I should, and angry or frustrated, or, in other words, rejecting the Torah's own self-definition. She's not coming from that at all. And she wants to have access to Torah, and she has access to Torah. And that's fine. And so what Reb Shach is saying here is, I'm getting a little bit long-winded here, but what he's saying is that the fact that she chooses to sit and learn, shehi yodas ba'atzma shalomedes lehislamed. She knows I am different, and I'm sitting down because I genuinely wish to I have a brain, and I want to have an access to Torah Hashem. And it's coming from a genuine position of wanting to know Torah Hashem. And therefore, v'lo totzi es divrei Torah divrei havai, says Rav Shach. Such a person will not be motzi Torah divrei havai. And here he's actually making a fascinating point. If you look at the way, what I will say certainly from my perspective as an Orthodox rabbi, how can you tell, generally speaking, how are you going to tell when somebody comes to you and a woman at some point in your career will come to your office and say, Rabbi, I want to learn Gemara, or I really feel and I really... Obviously, you'll have to be able you'll have to make a value judgment in terms of the person and get to know them and understand them, and that's always critical in any rabbinical endeavor, in any human endeavor, really. But how are you going to work out? Let me give you a small tip, and this is really what Reb Shach is saying, and it's so true in experience. It's not the whole deal, but one very important way of being able to tell whether this is coming from some sort of militant, political, agenda-driven thing, or if it is just a genuine desire to learn Torah, is whether it would come in it's usually often comes in one of two flavors. Either, I would like to learn Torah. I would like to learn Torah. Mm-hmm. And that's what Rav Shach is saying. And very often that will be, it's a good sign, it's very likely to be, no reason to suspect, otherwise it wouldn't be genuine. If it says, Rabbi, I feel there ought to be Gemara classes in our Kehillah for women. Not, I want to learn Torah. But why is there no program for women?
I can tell you why.
Well, no, but did you hear the subtlety?
Yeah.
Somebody is saying, right, I know my father, I accept the fact, I understand the Rambam, Rov HaNoshim, Ein Data Mechuvenes, but I feel I am, whatever, I'm PhD material, I know that I'm an academic person, and it excites me, and I really want to know Torah. I want to know Torah. I want to know Torah. That's fine. Das. She's come lehislamed. Rabbi. Whereas if somebody comes and says, Rabbi, why on the educational program of our community, why aren't the Gemara classes for women? There's a much stronger chance that when you're talking about a program and that it's more political based. It's just an observation. It will have its. It's not foolproof, but it's an observation which I think is true, and I think that's Reb Shach is saying this. Okay, weiter. Shaharei hapoiresh, shaharei mefurish, kosav shemekabelas afilu schar, elo shehi eina k'mitzvah v'oisa. Fine. V'toma ani al hagra. Says Reb Shach, I wonder, I don't understand the Vilna Gaon. Masha kosav v'erechaim simen mem zayin sif yudalad, al masha isa shom shenoshim avarchus brichas ha-Torah, v'hamogen Avram kosav shamatam mishum shemechuyovos lilmid dinin shalahen. So the Mogen Avram says, because, well, they have to learn their own dinim. That's how the Mogen Avram understands it. And on that, if you remember, we saw yesterday, the Vilna Gaon says, Tam ze dochui. This reason is rejected. Ukrot sovach. Says the Gaon, the Pasuk shouts to us and says, teach your sons, not your daughters. Because the reason is because women make a bracha on mitzvah seishas man groma. The after kaimelon kilim lamdo tiflos. How can that be so? The Chazal say that if you teach your daughter Torah Shabbal Peh, it's as if you've taught her tiflos. Davke b'Torah Shabbal Peh. That only applies to Torah Shabbal Peh. But Torah Shabbal not. So what's he saying? Women only make a bracha on Birchas HaTorah if they're doing Torah Shabbal. It's not clear at all. Ve'eineni mevin. Says Rav Shach, I don't understand. Sheborur she'aleho ba'atzmo ein shum issa lilmod Torah Shabbal Peh. But look how Rav Shach understood. Sorry, I must open the window. I don't know about you, but I'm far too important here. Says Rav Shach, look how he learnt the Gaon. He obviously understood the Gaon to say that it would be asur for a woman to learn Torah Shabbal Peh. L'chura. And therefore he has the question, how can she make a bracha on something which is asur for her to do? So he says, yeah, that's only Torah Shabbal Peh, but she makes a bracha if she learns Torah Shabbal. According to the Vilna Gaon, if a woman learns Torah Shabbal, l'chura, she doesn't make a bracha. He doesn't draw the distinction, and that's Rav Shach's question. Look at the way he puts it. Ve'eineni mevin. Sheborur she'oleho ba'atzmo ein shum issa. He says, why doesn't the Gaon say what we would expect him to say and say, so, okay, the father shouldn't be teaching her. But if she wishes to learn herself, then that's fine. Obviously, he understood in the Gaon that the Gaon doesn't go along with this distinction. So then, how can she make a bracha? Oh, because it must be Torah Shabbal. He says, Eineni mevin, sheborur she'oleho ba'atzma is clear, says Reb Shach, not like the Gaon, that there is no issa whatsoever for her to learn Torah Shabbal Peh. Shehi yodas ba'atzma. Why is that? He says, I'll provide you the svara. She knows herself that the reason she's doing this is in order to learn el al ha'av hu ha'issur, or al misha melamed Torah, and somebody who teaches her Torah Shabbal Peh, it's asa. Va'al kein shapihi yechola levorach. So of course she can make a bracha. Not so he's arguing. He says he doesn't understand the Gaon. The efsha, then he tries. Efsha shekavonos ha'ogur masha mevi ha'mogen Avram anal shalachein hein mevorachos birchas ha'Torah mishum shemechuyovos lilmud din shalahen. The ogur that the Mogen Avram brings, which says that women are obligated with Birchas HaTorah because they have to learn their own dinim. Ein peirusha shein chayavos b'Talmud Torah. Maybe the pshat in the Ogur, it doesn't mean that they are mechuyev in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Shari akosuv potron, because the pasuk clearly tells us women are not mitzvah in Talmud Torah, like the Gun says. Ela hakavona shehari adin hi shanoshim v'chaz abritz v'seishas man groma. There is a halacha that women can make a bracha on a mitzvah seishas man groma. Ela shel inyan Talmud Torah efsha shehari zeki'ilu melamdo tiflas ve'in zemin adin shentavarik shehari yesh isa b'dova. So I have a problem. Because there's an Isser, maybe there's an Isser for them to learn, Al-Zeh Kosov Ogur, that they need to learn, therefore it can't be that there is an Isser. The Ogur is maybe saying, says Shach, that it can't be there's an Isser for them to learn, because they have to learn, because they need to know what to do their own dinim. And what would be if the father doesn't, for some reason, the father doesn't want to tell them, this is how you keep Hilchos Shabbos. This is how you keep Shabbos. Then, then they're going to have to teach themselves. Or you say so if they're orphans, then they themselves are going to have to learn. The Isser is for the father. Maybe the Isser is the father shouldn't teach them in terms of as one would teach. All the understanding, all the lomdas, all the thing. Just short, do, don't. Without the understanding.
But the king, Lishmor?
Sorry?
Back on the Lishmor?
Yeah, kind of thing. That's right. They should just hear. Not learn it, but just hear.
Okay.
Do this. Don't do that.
Why? I don't tell you. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And therefore, because there's no Issa for them to do a very basic learning, maybe that's the pshat in the Ogur, Shuvein Tzrichas Levarach, like they make on any mitzvah seishas man groma. He says, however, I looked into the Beis Yosef, I looked in the Ogur, it doesn't sound like that, and therefore I am stuck. And he remains with his original question on the Vilna Gaon. So that's a fascinating insight. Let's go back to page 2. I want to show you something, a shaila that was asked hundreds of years before from the Maharil. Okay, so we're really into much, much earlier territory, the end of the Rishonim, earlier Kadmonim. Shut Maharil is on page 2, Simon Kuf Tzadi Tes, or Rish Chavav, depending on which way. Chuvas L'Sheila. Lelamed Lenoshim, says the Maharil, to teach Velilmod Lenoshim, or to teach women, Afal Pi Shetzrichim Lekayim Kol Lois Asei V'Asei Namish Alei Azman Groma, even though they've got to keep, right, the vast majority of the Torah, Mikol Mokim Ein Lelamda Davakim Lamda Tiflos, Gedisa Perikol Yanoitel, V'Yalef Lo Me'ani Chochma Shechanti Orma, Kim Shenichim Sa Chochma V'Chein Pesh Rashi V'Techach Azad V'Vatzneah, V'Im Kain there is a real concern that she'll mess up Torah. That's the bottom line. Even though it's a mitzvah, interesting. Even though it is a mitzvah, what does that mean? It is a mitzvah. Not sure what he means by that. They're definitely not obligated. Now, really interesting. I was thinking this myself, and again, this is really not politically correct, and it's only an analogy, but it's not meant to be a total analogy. Okay, I'm saying this for the purpose not just of the recording, but Lamano Emes. The Rambam later in Hilchos Talmud Torah says that what happens if you have a Talmud and you know that the Talmud is quote unquote Talmud she'enoi hogun. A Talmud that is not sincere in his desire to learn and keep halacha. Not somebody, so we're not talking about kirov, we're not talking about where you're trying, somebody who is anti, and you know that they don't fundamentally accept the authority of Chazal, and you're not allowed to teach such a Talmud. Now, that let's talk about a male Talmud. So that person has a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. That person, the Talmud, The fact that he chooses to be a Rasha, that's bad news, right? But that he still has a mitzvah. The fact that there's a famous...
But that's a state, no? It's,
yes.
To see what it is, it's like a state
yes.
where in this state he...
Correct.
After, and then maybe it will change.
It might change, it might not. Okay. Correct. I'm not sure what the relevance of that is.
I'm just trying to understand, like...
Yeah. He is, because this is the point. This is the point. The Maharil is comparing teaching a woman Torah to teaching a Talmud She'ena Hogan. Teaching a Talmud that I am doing Torah a disservice by teaching Torah to somebody who will not treat the Torah and approach it with the reverence and these are for different reasons. Again, I want to state and stress, I'm not suggesting women are certainly in the state of being Talmud She'ena Hogan, but it's a proof that there is a concept that even somebody who he themselves is mitzvah in Talmud Torah, but if teaching them will not do Torah a service, then you're not allowed to teach them. In other words, so what we've actually done is, what the Maharil has done in this one little statement is he's depoliticized it, and you need to appreciate this. Because this would be the same for a male Talmud. Do you understand? There is a responsibility. We have a responsibility, especially if you go back to my earlier shir about Torah is seen primarily through the lens of transmitting it. Then that comes with a responsibility. And it is forbidden to teach a Talmud She'ena Hogan, and there is a class of people, because broadly speaking, their approach to Torah won't be positively conducive to how Torah should be understood, and therefore one doesn't teach them. There are exceptions, of course. You know, the Gemara tells the story, by the way, very important Gemara. The Gemara tells the story of when they deposed Rabbi Eliezer and brought in Rabbi Gamliel. What happened on that day? Because Rabbi Eliezer had a policy that if a Talmud was not toichoi kebaroi, you all know the Gemara Brachos and elsewhere, that he wasn't let into the Beis HaMedrash. We denied them access, and then Rabbi Gamliel had a different approach, and he said, we'll let them into the Beis HaMedrash. This was not men, women, that wasn't the point. And then the Srabu Safsala Beis HaMedrash, and on that day, the numbers of the Beis HaMedrash, they doubled, if my memory serves me correctly. And then he was upset, and then he was shown in a dream that they were Turkic, they weren't Turkic Kabarite. The point is, Torah is not just a free-for-all. That is the point. And in the responsibility for teaching Torah, like it's also L'Ilal Talmud She'ena Hogun, the same thing would be for women generally. Now here's the point. It says that back to the Maharil. You make the argument and say, but surely they need access to Torah. How can you say it's forbidden to teach them Torah? They need to know what to do. There is more than one way to skin a cat, as we say, right? There's more than one way to know what to do and what not to do. The vast majority, I have no doubt, of our great-grandmothers were illiterate. They probably still knew Tehillim Baal Peh, they still davened, and they were, in many respects, much more erlich than we are today, as we would say. They absorbed Torah in their bones, in their blood, va'ani tefillah, and this is their tefillim, Tehillim, and their tears that is probably the reason that most of us are here today. But they were not academic in that sense. How did they know what to do? They absorbed it by osmosis. They lived it. It was known at what Professor Chaim Soloveitchik calls it. It was the mimetic tradition, the Masorah. You lived in a frum house. You picked up what to do, the do's and the don'ts. You lived it. It wasn't a dry. It wasn't an academic limit. You didn't need to go to SEM to learn out what's losh and what's moira and what's. You saw what your mother did and your baba did, and they saw what their mothers and their babas did, and if they weren't sure, they went and asked a shayla, and that's it. So, of course they have to do. They learned it by accepting it, the tradition. And when they're not sure, they went and asked the Rav. Says the Maharil, Shebekiyos harbe b'dinei melicha v'hadocha v'nikur v'hilchas nida u'kayotzeba. Our women, says the Maril, are very fluent and expert in the halachas of salting chicken and washing it, nikur, porging it, and the halachas of niduk yetzim. None of this was done through the medium of academic study, but rather through absorbing Messiah. It was a lived Yiddishkeit. In the days of Chizkiah HaMelech, when we had a whole different set of halachas which we had to live by the whole time, which was the dinim of Tumah and Tahara, and it was daily, then they knew those halachas as well. They knew the halachas of Zava Gedola, Zava Ketana, yes, Tumas Heset, Mishkavu Moshav. They knew these. They didn't know it because they sat and learned Mishnayos Zavim, Mishnayos Tvul. No, they knew it because they lived it. They knew what was a Rishon L'Tumah, Sheni L'Tumah, Shlishi L'Tumah. They know it because they lived it. And then he says a beautiful pshat in the Gemara. What does the Gemara say? Look at the top of the page. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Tzadi Dalet that in the days, go to the second bottom line, the penultimate line, the Gemara on the top, yeah? Bodku midon vad Beersheva. Gemara Sanhedrin Tzadi Dalet on the base. They checked from Dan to Beersheva. They checked all of Eretz Yisrael. V'lo motzu am ha'oretz migvas v'adan tifras. They didn't find v'lo motzu am ha'oretz. They didn't find any am ha'oretz. Migvas v'adan tifras. V'lo motzu tinoik v'tinoikes. Ish v'isha. Shelo yehoyu bekiyin behilchas tumah v'tara. In the days of Chizkiah, the Torah knowledge was widespread. They checked and there wasn't a child, a man or a woman that weren't expert in Hilchas Tumah V'Tara, says the Maril. What does that mean? Do you think they all sat down, the boys and the girls sat down and learnt Mishnayos Machshirin and Zovim and Tvul and Yodayim? Of course not. He says, look at the way he explains it. Says the Maril, if there was no Harbotzas HaTorah, if the Torah wasn't spread for men, then how on earth would the women of the Amoritz or the kids have known this? The pshat is, do you think they sat and learnt this? Of course not. What it means is that the males, the fathers, learnt. And they knew properly. And when they knew properly, they lifted up the level of observance based on their scholarship. And therefore, every child knew by default, because that's what they lived. That's what it means. That's his proof. But of course, he says, Osel Alam Don Torah. And he said, even Avodim is the same thing. Avodim, he brings a beautiful raya. He says, Avodim are chayav to do all the mitzvahs that women have to do. But it's still Osel Alam Don Torah. It is forbidden to teach your Eved Torah. It's a Gemara in Ksubas. So it is, again, a genius proof that it must be that there is a class of people that are obligated to keep various halachas, and yet they are absolutely denied access to Talmud Torah.
So it seems to me that there is two different kinds of knowing Torah. There's this part which is apparently more like just doing the outer layer or just keeping mitzvot, but then there's another thing which is, so to speak, the structure behind all of those. So those are differently divided depending on who it is. It seems.
I'm not clear what you're saying.
I'm saying
are you talking about performance of mitzvahs? Keeping Shabbos. Let's say keeping Shabbos. Let's talk about Shabbos.
So it seems that one type of person or that belongs to some group would just get the concept without any the deeper structure behind it.
Correct.
And the person who is chayiv to teach or has in a different realm gets the same thing also, but then the whole back skeleton of it.
Correct. So from the perspective of performance of mitzvahs, they're all the same. When you're out, he said the Maril brings a beautiful raya from Avodim. He says Avodim are mechuyev min haTorah. They're mechuyev to do all the mitzvahs like Noshim, but they're not Jewish. So it's Osel Alam Don Torah Gemara Ksubas. So you see Mefurish, beautiful raya, genius. You've got a whole category of people that have the same. You see that you can be the Torah can be mechayev somebody to do something min Torah without, whilst at the same time denying them access to limud Torah. And the raya is avodim kananim. It's a genius of a raya. So Elamai. So how can the Torah expect them to do it? There's still an absolute expectation that they have to do it like women. Torah says there's more than one way to skin a cat. There are other ways of getting access to knowledge, and that is how our bubbas and now we're going to come to. We will come to the Chofetz Chaim. In fact, maybe we should do that very soon. Yes, I'm agreeing with you. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, that's good. They did it al pi avuhem, al vihem. It talks about bruria. We haven't really discussed bruria. As the story in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. Yes.
Just sorry.
Yes.
Do you think there's a compensation taking place from the side of how to explain why women maybe come into the rabbi's office and say, why is there no Gemara in the thing?
So
maybe there's a compensation for they had the Masorah back then, which was like.
The question is, you may be right and wrong at the same time. In other words, hold that thought, because it's going to become relevant when we discuss the Chofetz Chaim, which I think we're not going to actually be able to do today. We will do Bli Neder tomorrow. Tomorrow we will learn we'll begin to learn a little bit about Sarah Shnira and the Chofetz Chaim, and how the reality that we see today, certainly in some areas within Orthodoxy, does not appear to be in line with what we have been learning until now, and how and why that is. Okay, and we'll start also delineating some of the differences. I just want to finish off before we go quickly, is the last paragraph here in the Maril. Omnom yoisen nirali sheme'atzmam osu. And he said, now, I don't know if you know the story of Bruria, Rabbi Meir's wife, who does not meet a very good end. We should probably learn it. And he says that actually they went off, the women that did go and learn, they went off and they did it themselves. Yosin nirali sheme'atzmam osu, shahari Bruria hichicha soif al tchilosa, shaloi somcha al divrei chachomim she'omru noshim daton kalos. Chazal said noshim daton kalos, and again, that is a statement that needs to be put in a context. It does not mean that they're stupid. It does not mean that they lack yiras shamayim. It means, I'll just say it in a quick sentence, that their capacity to be swayed, their da'as is kala. We have to know what da'as means, but their ability potentially to be swayed is different and lighter and easier. And Bruria, who was brilliant in Torah, met a sticky end. And he says that was because Shlei Samcha, says the Maril, Lei Samcha al Divrei Chachomim, who said Noshim Daton Kalos. V'hochinama Samcha al Tzidkosa Shlei Taver al Limud, so she relied on her own tzidkus, that she wouldn't end up transgressing. V'afilu l'divrei mar, nami ein miyushav shari mali divrei hayomim, shemirotzen nefesh, he finishes off, says, mirotzen nefesh osasa, she chose to do it by ignoring chachomim, and it didn't end well. We'll continue tomorrow.